There used to be a television show called Fear Factor. Some critics suggested it was a new low for television. The reality show paid people to face their worst fears. For example, one guy was staked to the ground, and for 10 minutes, 200 rats crawled over him. Other things that contestants faced included covered in snakes, cockroaches, and the list goes on. I considered showing you a clip, but I looked at several and I'm like, wow, there's none of these. That some of you will have nightmares, and then the things they would have to eat, I'm not going to mention them because some of you would be nauseous. Fear Factor capitalized on the fact that people are afraid of a lot of things, and others find a perverse pleasure in seeing their fear. And let's face it, sometimes fear can be funny. This is two ladies. They're in Niagara Falls, New York. It has a haunted house, one of these places you go into. And what I love about this is they know that there's going to be things trying to scare them. I mean, you're in this, there are these, fake things jumping out at you, and but it's just kind of funny to see the complete and total terror on their faces from some horror house props. But let's face it, we all have our own fears. I don't like snakes. I'm not phobic of them, but I don't care. Oh, it's just a garter snake. It's not venomous. I don't care. It's a snake. I don't like snakes. Remember out in Arizona, the boys and I were hiking, and I'd said to them, like, guys, watch out for snakes. There's rattlesnakes. The whole area is just filled with rattlesnakes. And we're climbing over some rocks, and David's ahead of me. He goes from one rock to the next. And then I go to step from it, and I hear a rattle, and right underneath, now the rock's about this tall, right underneath there is a rattlesnake. Boy, you want to talk about, the boys always laugh because my voice went about 5 octaves higher. I'm like, guys, snake! And it was terrifying. Well, my wife is afraid of spiders. Now, ladies, I got her permission to share this, because if I don't say that, there's women like, oh, what kind of husband is he telling about his wife? So Deb gave me permission. Plus, she's in the nursery, so I really can say whatever I want anyway. But about a little over less than a year ago, she was bitten by what she is sure is a spider. We don't really know what for sure it was, but she's convinced it's a spider. It probably was. But it began to get more swollen as the days went on. And I said to her, like, you need to go see the doctor, honey. That doesn't look good. And Deb does not like seeing the doctor. So, oh, it's fine, I'm fine. And finally she's at work, and one of the nurses on the unit that Deb's on said, like, Deb, what is that on your arm? She said, well, I had a spider bite it, 5 days ago. And so the nurse circles it with a marker. And later in the day, it's gotten substantially larger. And the nurse says, you need to go to the hospital. Deb's like, well, I don't want to go to the hospital. So Deb went to the doctor because, why do what a medical professional says you should do? So she goes to the doctor, and he really said, well, we can send you to the hospital, put you on intravenous antibiotics. I think normal antibiotics will probably take care of it. And so she took those, and she was fine then. But since then, anytime she sees a spider, she'll say to me, well, I almost died from a spider bite. Now, she's half joking, and I would say, well, yeah, because you were too dumb to go to the doctor when your husband said to go to the doctor. But she's like, well, I almost died. She'll call me from her office. Mark, there's a spider web in my office at work. I'm like, yeah, there's spider webs all over. I know, but there's a spider. I'm like, yeah, Deb, there are spiders all over. Well, around our house now, I am always on spider patrol, because if she sees one, and this stays in this room, and I'm serious, no one says a word to me. But 2 nights ago, I'm in our bathroom, and right by the shower, there's this not a huge spider, but big enough that she would not have taken a shower for a week in that bathroom. And so I quickly kill it. And about a month before I saw one, same area. And by the time I stood up and toilet to get it, it was gone. And I literally spent 45 minutes. I'm ready for bed. I want to go to sleep. I spent 45 minutes just waiting for it so my wife would not have to see that spider. She hates spiders. And she would agree. If you remember from World War II, President Roosevelt had a famous saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself and spiders. Well, life is filled with reasons for fear or anxiety. When I use the word fear, I mean everything from just apprehension to worry, dread, and even terror. Fear starts when we're very young. We fear things like the darkness, monsters. Continues into our teenage years when we fear things like rejection and humiliation, failure. Adulthood is filled with even more fears: disease, death, financial problems, broken relationships, aging, crime, and more. There's so many things in life we can fear. Well, how do we deal with the fears is the question. Some people look for the security in their money. If they just have enough money, then they feel safe. Others seek it in relationships. If I just have people around me, then I'll be okay. Others place their trust in the government. Why, I don't know, but they do. I'm thankful to live in America. I love my country. But still, I don't trust in our government. Some trust in the latest drug. Oh, when this new drug comes out, then I'll be safe. None of these things, though, are true security. In none of these things can we place our trust. No amount of money, success, or position in life can give you peace in every situation. So the question becomes, how can we have victory over our fear? Well, the answer to this important question is given in Psalm 27, which was written by David. Now, David understood what it was like to have your security dashed to pieces. Although he was called a man after God's own heart, he experienced the bottom dropping out from his life many times. 2 weeks ago, we saw David was hiding from the king who wanted to kill him. And David and his men are out, and they're helping out this guy and taking care of his shepherds and sheep and watching over them. And they're hungry. And so when this guy should have given them a gift and he didn't, David became angry. Matter of fact, he really said abusive things toward David. And David's going to go take his revenge when God sends this man's wife, who was a wise woman. And David calmed down and he thanked her, because she stopped him from making a mistake that would have always been regretted. Well, today we're going to look at David. We're going to see now how he dealt with fears later in life. And he had reason to fear. I don't know about you, no one has ever, to my knowledge, tried to kill me. My wife has wanted to kill me. My sons have certainly wanted to kill me. And if David were not in junior church right now helping, I know he would give an amen to that. But no one has ever tried to kill me. So when we talk about fear, David understood real fear, because multiple times in his life, he had people trying to kill him. King Saul, on many occasions, tried to take his life. Later, his own son launches a rebellion against his father, and David has to flee the capital, fearing for his life. This is a man who knew what fear looked like. And yet he'd come to a place where his faith overwhelmed his fear. And so Psalm 27 tells us this: "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" So David begins by saying, the Lord is my light. Humans, we have an instinctive fear of darkness. Here in central New Jersey, we don't really understand the word darkness. There is always a glow on the horizon. There's just too many homes, too many businesses, too many streetlights. It is never truly dark. But you go out west, like the boys and I have camped in Utah, and you down a dirt road, and there is no one around, and there is not a light to be found, and the nearest home is probably at least 30 miles away. And it is just pitch black unless the moon is out. And I'll tell you what, David understood the fear that could come from darkness. Again, Saul has sent men to kill him. So you can imagine him. It's a dark night, waiting and just wondering, what's that sound? What is that happening? Nowadays, even if it is dark, what do we do if it gets really dark and you need to see and you're scared? What do? Your cell phone, right? Like, remember, those of us who are older, remember days when you kept flashlights in your car? Yes. And then you just prayed it's 5 years later and you turn it on, the battery's dead. And you're like, oh no, now what am I going to do? We always have light now. So again, we don't get this idea, but light is such an amazing, wonderful thing. It makes us feel secure. In John chapter 8, Jesus said this: "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." See, we need to bask in his radiance. He reveals to us the path in front of us. If it's pitch black, you can't tell where you're going. But Jesus says, I'm the light. If we walk in him, we will not walk in darkness. And so that gives us hope in the midst of the fears that come. David then asked himself a question when he said, "Whom shall I fear? If the Lord is my light, my rescuer, why should I be afraid?" That would be irrational. because nothing is bigger than God. He continues saying, the Lord is the stronghold of my life. Now, we don't have strongholds nowadays. We don't need fortresses to protect us. If we have something happen, we call 911, the police come quickly. But in that day, there were marauders who would come and attack. And there were small enemy nations and large enemy nations who would send their troops ahead. And there was no internet to warn you. There was no emergency broadcast system or television. And so they needed a place to run to for safety. And so a stronghold would have been a tower, somewhere large, somewhere small, but a place where an enemy could not easily get into it. If they're just a marauding band, they're not going to want to try to force their way in. Even though you may not be gifted as a soldier, you could have spears, you could easily stop them. Stronghold is a place of safety, and that's what David says God is. God is our place of safety. He's the place we can run to when we're afraid. He's our refuge. If we look at his greatness, our problem shrinks. If we focus on God, our fears begin to disappear. And so he continues, when the wicked advance against me to devour me, it's my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. So as David focuses on God, his confidence grows. He's assured instead of anxious. Now, notice David expects to have trouble in life. He says in verse 2, when the wicked advance against me. It's not if the wicked advance against me. Listen, God has not promised to protect us from problems. He has not said that trouble will not come our way. What he has said is that he'll be our stronghold, that he will be with us in the midst of us. God makes a way for us to be free from troubled hearts, but not free from troubled times. David says, if an army besieges me, my heart will not fear. He says, even then I'll be confident. And the Hebrew word confident here means to trust, to be secure, to have assurance, but in something else, something outside yourself. And so his assurance is not because, hey, I'm a mighty man of valor, because I'm a great warrior. It's because of the God I serve. I can trust in him. Danger was imminent. Pressure was mounting. The days were tough, but David did not fear because he had God. What about you? Where do you turn? We all have many reasons for fear. Or if not fear, anxiety. If not anxiety, a little bit of apprehension. But what do we do with that fear? This psalm shows us fear pushes us to fall back on God and realize he is our strength. And that's what David does here in verses 4 to 6. He says this, one thing I ask from the Lord, this only I seek. By the way, we just sang that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At his sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Now he says he wants to dwell in the house of the Lord. He's not talking about literally like setting up, I want to put a mat in there and I want to sleep in the sanctuary or, rest on the pews or, in our case, the chairs would be really uncomfortable to sleep in. He's not saying that. What he's saying is, God, I want to spend time with you. I want to be close to you. When he's talking about the tent here, that would be the tabernacle. His son Solomon will build the temple. But the tent would be the place where people would go to worship God and to make sacrifices. And so he's saying, God, I want to be close to you. I want to be near. He says, one thing I ask, this only thing I seek. Riches. Rich is awesome, right? Power. Who doesn't love some power? Fame. Our culture loves fame. That's not what he wants. He wants to know God's presence. He wants to be close to God. And God gave him all those things. He then had riches, and he had power, and he had fame, but that wasn't what he sought after. He wanted God's presence in his life. He says he wants to be close to God. He says, all the days of my life. He was focused on God, and it shrunk the size of the fears he faced. And he didn't just focus on God on Sundays or on holidays or when he got in trouble, which is often when we focus on God. Lord, you get a couple hours in the morning. I mean, hopefully only an hour if Mark sticks to his time frame. By the way, it's your time frame. That's not mine. Like, Glenn, do you feel like you have to finish after an hour? Nah, we don't feel that way. Be glad some pastors don't feel like they have to finish after 2 hours, so be thankful. But many of us we look at God for a short time Sunday morning, maybe at meals, Lord bless us food, blah, blah, blah. But we don't really focus on him. David wants to know God more. So if you want to learn to love God, you have to spend time with him. How do you do that? You're spending time in his word. I think the best time in the morning, before you start your day, it doesn't have to be 2 hours, it could be 10 minutes, but spending time reading, what does God have to say to me today? And then spending time praying, Lord, I surrender this day to you. And if your heart is at that place, then when the things come during the day that would cause fear, or maybe not fear, maybe anxiety, maybe not anxiety, apprehension, you just remember, God, you're in charge of this. I'm not in charge of this, Lord, you're in charge. And I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to rest in you. And I'm going to believe that you're God and that I can trust you. David wants to sing, he says, to the Lord. He wants to worship him. That's what we do Sunday morning. But it's also something you can do at home as you listen to worship songs. Sing on your own, but lift up God's name. Sarver says we need to make it our goal to get to know God better. When that happens, our love for him will grow, our faith for him will be greater, and our courage will increase. David's faith and his love for the Lord enabled him to be a man of courage. When we, like David, live with God, look to God, and listen to God, we will come to know him intimately, and during times of fear, we will be able to express the same faith that David had. Verse 7. Hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, God my Savior. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. David was confident in coming to God with his problems because he knew that God loved him and cared about him. He was waiting for David to run to him for comfort. But sometimes we don't feel like we can go to God. We're too far from him. We've sinned too much. We've ignored him too long. You see a little bit of this feeling in David. He says, do not hide from me in verse 9. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. Do not reject me or forsake me. Often we feel that way, like, Lord, I can't come to you because I've messed up too much. But then David's faith asserts itself. And he says, though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. I mean, parents are the ones who normally, if they're good parents, they'll stick with you through thick and thin. But he said, even if my parents forsake me, Lord, you will not. And so we can trust in God. We can rely on him. God's desire is to see us with childlike dependence. When we finally come to him and say with all our heart, Lord, I need you. Joel was a toddler, and he was always a good sleeper. And one night he woke up, and he's crying, and he's calling out, Mom, Dad. And so I ran in, and he's shaking. You could tell he's afraid. He must have had a nightmare. And so I just picked him up, and I held him, and I'm like, it's okay, Joel. Dad's here, and you're safe. And Mom's here, you're safe. And God's watching over you, so you don't have to be afraid. And I set him back down in his bed, and he laid right back down and went to sleep because Dad said it was okay. Our Heavenly Father is just waiting for us when we're fearful, when we're apprehensive, when we're worried, to just come, and his arms are wide open. He's saying, why won't you run to me? I'll calm your fears. I'll be with you. But we have to surrender those fears to him. We have to give them over and let God take control. Well, verse 12. Do not turn me over to the desires of my foes. For false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. So David's enemies are trying to destroy him. They're slandering him. But he remains confident in the Lord. His trust is in God alone. It's like David saying, yes, this situation is crummy. It stinks. But wait. Just wait. Because God's going to come through. You can count on it. And it's true, no matter how bad it gets, our God is in the business of resurrection. He brings beauty from ashes, and so we need not fear. Courage continues even when adversity strikes. And so we can trust in God. So David found his courage in the Lord. Yeah, maybe he was a courageous man, but more than that, he was a man whose faith was so strong that he didn't worry about the things that worry us. Listen to what he said earlier in this passage. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. In other words, no matter what happens, no matter how bad things get, even then I can trust that my God will be with me, and I will not be afraid. His courage was not just on the surface. This was deep. This was real, because his faith in God was so tremendous. So how can we have victory over fear? By focusing on God, because when we do, our fears begin to fade and disappear. Robert Grove wrote, "For 4 hours he held the cylinder, waiting for rescue or an immediate death. After digging up what appeared to be an unexploded World War I bomb, David Page held on to it, afraid that it would detonate in his arms. While holding the bomb, the terrified 40-year-old from Norfolk, England, called the operator on his cell phone. He even used the call to tell some last words that he wanted passed on to his family if he didn't make it. The woman police officer operator kept saying, 'It's going to be okay, it's going to be okay.' His response was, 'You're not the one holding a bomb.' Well, first responders rushed to the scene in eastern England, and an army bomb disposal unit eventually arrived. But the drama came to an abrupt end when the bomb was identified. It was part of the hydraulic suspension system of a very common European car. Well, Grove concludes, there are times we find ourselves frozen with irrational fear. We know the one who is in us is greater than the one who's in the world, but we forget the strength of our protector while clutching our fear. Let go. It's not a bomb, and you're going to be okay." David's courage was rooted in his faith in God. It was the type of courage that held up under adversity and was still there through some of the worst nightmares that came true in his life. I don't know about you, but I want to have that kind of courage. I know some of you in this room, you're facing things that are scary. Maybe it's a medical problem. Maybe it's something with your family. Maybe your finances are collapsing. Maybe it's a phobia or fear that just completely overwhelms you. My neighbor across the street from us, for about the first 5 years we lived at our home, we did not know he was married. His wife had agoraphobia. She would not leave the house. And it was so neat, like 5 years later, we see, like, who is this woman? And then soon we find out it's his wife, and she starts doing better and better, and then eventually I see her outside mowing. Friends, I don't know what your phobia is, what your fear is, what in your life right now you're facing that seems scary, but I do know the God who loves you. You should not be afraid of what the future holds, because you know the one who holds your future in his hands. So what can we learn from this song? Well, we can ask God to help us overcome our fears. And that's something we need to do. Go to him. He knows your fear. He's not surprised by it. But you need to just stop saying, "Well, I'm afraid of this yet. I'm really this scared." And just say, "Lord, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to live a life of fear. I want to live a life of faith." And so if it's one thing or 20 things or 100 things, hand them and say, "Father, help me. You know my fears. Take them, Lord." And surrender them to him. And then maybe share with a Christian friend and ask them, "Pray with me. Pray for me." That I would have the courage to trust in God. Maybe you need to apologize for something you've done and you're afraid to talk to the person. Maybe you need to confront someone and you hate confrontation. Maybe you're afraid to make changes in your life that you know need to be made. Maybe you hate snakes or spiders. Identify your fear. Ask the Lord to help you. Ask someone to pray with you. And then, as David says in verse 14, wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Don't be afraid to follow God, because he wants to give you the strength and courage you need. And then the other thing to do is this: develop a relationship with God that produces courage. As I said earlier, if you were spending time daily in his word, and you're reading your Bible, if you are spending significant time each day praying and just handing things over to God, he is going to help you get things into perspective. That fear that looks so overwhelming, so big, so impossible, when your eyes are on him, you're going to remember, this is my God, and here is my fear. Why am I so worried? Remember the words from Romans chapter 8. Paul says, if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Who can be against us, he asks. Well, a lot of people. I mean, David has a king trying to kill him. Later, his son has gathered troops together trying to kill him. This doesn't mean problems don't come. But it means if God's on our side, we don't have to worry. He's in charge. And we can trust him. And that doesn't mean things always go well. But it means we have someone we can run to in the midst of the struggles. Whatever or whoever our foes are, they are no match for the living God. And then note the promise the Lord gives here. He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? See what I'm saying, man? If God would give his son for you, if he would love you that much, then why can't you trust him with these smaller things? Why can't you believe him and rely on him? In Christianity Today, George Muller wrote, the beginning of anxiety is the end of faith. And the beginning of true faith is the end of anxiety. Let me say that again. The beginning of anxiety is the end of faith. So if you start fearing, if you say, oh no, what am I going to do? Your faith begins to disappear. But if your faith begins to assert itself, then the fear begins to disappear. Now sometimes we feel like we're alone. God's not anywhere close by. Anxiety and fear creeps in. But in reality, God is always there. Even when we can't see him, even when we can't feel him, we can trust him and we can rest. In his book, Soul Salsa, author Leonard Sweet writes, one tribe of Native Americans had a unique practice for training their young boys. On the night of a boy's 13th birthday, he was placed in a dense forest to spend the night there alone. He had never been away from his family or the safety of his tribe, but on that night he was blindfolded, taken miles away, and when the blindfold was taken off, he was in the middle of thick woods by himself all night long. Every time a twig snapped, he likely envisioned a wild animal ready to pounce. If he heard a howl in the distance, he would imagine the wolves creeping up on him. Every time the wind blew, he wondered what sinister sounds it was masking. No doubt it was a terrifying night for many. But after what seemed like an eternity, the first rays of sunlight would enter the forest. Looking around, he'd see flowers and trees and the path he'd been brought in on. And then to his utter astonishment, he'd behold a man standing just a small distance away, armed with a bow and spear. It was his father, and he had been there all night long. Friends, you feel alone, and the fear is overwhelming, but your Father's there. He is watching over you, and you can trust in him. You can hand him your fears, knowing that he loved you enough to send his son, and that he loves you enough to walk with you through whatever life will throw your way. Focus on God, and your fear will begin to disappear. Let's pray.